Good evening. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the 31st Annual Howard R. Bowen Lecture. And this year we're delighted to welcome Professor Sheila Slaughter from the University of Georgia. This is our 31st annual lecture, and Sheila comes on the heels of a long line of very distinguished and notable scholars, observers, participants in higher education, and has a topic that is quite distinct from those that have come before her, a topic that deals with STEM education in the liberal arts. And I'll let Sheila introduce those ideas as we go forward. But I want to say a couple of things about the Bowen Lecture itself, about Howard Bowen and about Sheila as a way of proper introduction to her talk this evening. The Bowen Lecture is funded by the Howsam Fisk Endowment, and the Bowen Lecture was formerly known as the Howsam Fisk Colloquium, and this was organized many, many years ago, and this was a legacy of the late Winifred Howsam and her associate Helen Fisk, and Winifred and Helen were pioneers during the decades following the First World War in promoting opportunities for women, especially in education. In 1984, the faculty within the School of Educational Studies renamed the lectureship to honor Professor Howard R. Bowen for his many outstanding contributions to the Claremont colleges and to American higher education generally. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that. And in a minute, you'll see what I just read to you, so there you go. I got it right, okay? All right, so let me move on and introduce Howard. Howard Bowen was CGU's 7th president. He has a PhD from the University of Iowa. He was the R. Stanton Avery Professor of Economics at CGU, and as I said, is president. Howard was also president of Grinnell, University of Iowa, and played important roles in a number of other institutions, including the University of Illinois as the Dean of the College of Commerce in the 1940s. And that was a period that really shaped Howard's thinking about higher education and the role of us as academics in this enterprise of higher learning, in that he was the dean of the school, and Howard was a Keynesian economist, and he was a Keynesian economist trained at Iowa in the 1930s. And if you remember your U.S. history, Keynes played a very important part in the New Deal that, by many accounts, helped us work our way out of the Great Depression. But Keynesianism came with a number of other liabilities ideologically later. It played powerfully into the small government, big government arguments, the role of government in employment, the role of government generally. But this is to say that Howard was trained and steeped in this idea of Keynesianism in his brand of economics. When he went to Illinois, he brought this with him, and he brought a number of other junior faculty with him to Illinois. And these junior faculty also shared his ideology, and across a period of 2 years, the first year being very successful for Howard as dean, the second year, rifts began to appear ideological rifts began to appear between the old guard and the new guard at Illinois in the College of Commerce and Business. And this manifests itself in who was getting resourced and who wasn't, and there was a fight over resources, and pretty quickly this devolved into I'm being discriminated against because I'm a free marketer. And Howard is a Keynesian. And this played out over a number of years, and it was quite a controversy at Illinois. And it was particularly controversial because of the way that it played into the 1950s and into McCarthyism. And Howard was painted through the course of this as a free market liberal, familiar with these terms in today's debate, as opposed to a market-oriented, sensible economist, the way this was played. And a free market liberal was also understood to be a radical. This is a radical free market liberal, and was quickly wrapped up in communism and socialism and McCarthyism. And so his period at Illinois is often referred to as the academic McCarthyism era. And this led to him eventually leaving Illinois, and all of the young faculty leaving Illinois, in Illinois' Department of, or School of Commerce and Business going on a steep decline, while the rest of the university actually enjoyed an ascendancy through this. So this is to say that Howard was a powerful force intellectually in the early part of his career as an academic, and eventually as a mid-level administrator, as dean of the college. Now, Howard's interest coming out of that took many forms. One of them was an interest in the role of higher education, the role of higher education in society, the role of higher education as a public good in a democracy. He wrote widely. He has published books. One of his later books was Investment in Learning. The subtitle is The Individual and Social Value of American Higher Education, making a case for us thinking very carefully about the social value of higher education, as well as the individual value of higher education at a time that we began to make significant disinvestments in the higher education enterprise as a public good. So he was calling attention to that, particularly in the later part of his career. But in the earlier part of his career, before becoming dean at Illinois and encountering the Bowen controversy, or enabling the Bowen controversy, he published a book called Corporate Social Responsibility. And actually, the book was called The Social Responsibilities of the Businessman. The idea in the book was corporate social responsibility, a concept that has emerged anew, seemingly, over the last decade in particular, as we think about the responsibility of corporations as public entities in defining the public sphere in America. Howard was on the front end of this. This idea of corporate social responsibility was really his. It was an innovative form of thinking about the role of the corporation in American society. When he made his way to Claremont, he naturally connected powerfully with Peter Drucker, who shared many of the same values and ideas as Howard, and they were able to make quite an impact as a pair here, a pair of academics and a pair of important administrators at Claremont Graduate University. If you're a higher education scholar, you probably know Howard Bowen. If you can't connect Howard Bowen to this idea, you probably know of Bowen's Law. And for all of us in higher education, and anybody who's in this room in higher education is struggling with the economic realities of higher education today, I will read to you what Bowen's Law is, because I think that you'll appreciate it. This entry goes, the last job Howard Bowen ever took was the R. Stanton Avery Professor of Economics and Education at Claremont Graduate University. During his tenure from 1974 to 84, Bowen published 3 important writings: Investment in Learning, Costs of Higher Education, and American Professors, a National Resource Imperiled. The cost of higher education is best known for Bowen's revenue theory of cost, sometimes called Bowen's Law. Okay, it's a very complicated law. Listen to this. At any time, it's complicated, but it's really simple. At any time, the unit cost of education is determined by the amount of revenues currently available for education relative to enrollment. The statement is more than a tautology, as it expresses the fundamental fact that unit cost, i.e. the cost of education, is determined by hard dollars of revenue, and only indirectly and distantly by considerations of need, technology, efficiency, and market wages and prices. So this was Bowen's Law. Basically, we will raise as much as we can raise, and we will spend as much as we spend based on how much we raise, or something like that. I skewered tying that together there. But Bowen's Law is an important artifact of Howard's contributions to higher education. So we are delighted to be able to have the opportunity to bring speakers like Sheila Slaughter in for the Bowen Lecture. Sheila is the Louise McBee Professor of Higher Education at the Institute of Higher Education at the University of Georgia. Sheila has a PhD in Educational Studies from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She also knows a bit about English literature from Madison. She has been visiting scientist at the National Science Foundation. She has worked at the University of Arizona, the University of Buffalo, and Virginia Tech. Her official blurb from the Institute of Higher Education magazine here, 50 years. Not 50 years that you've been at the Institute of Higher Education. Sheila Slaughter's research focuses on a variety of issues relating to market emphases, privatization, and commercialization in higher education. Recently, she examined relationships between universities and the corporate sector and how university trustees serve as links between academia and industry. She is currently working on a 3-year NSF grant entitled the Executive Science Network, University Trustees, and the Organization of University Industry Exchanges. So that's the official blurb. The unofficial piece is that Sheila has been working on ideas of intellectual property, the commodification of knowledge, the changing roles of faculty since the early 90s. She has been a leader in the development of the core ideas that have shaped the ways we understand the changing nature of the research university in particular, and private sector knowledge development specifically. She has she's had a direct hand in 2 of the most important books in higher education in my generation. One of them is, the first one with Larry Leslie, is Academic Capitalism. The subtitle is Politics, Policies, in the Entrepreneurial University, which really charts the ways in which faculty roles have changed around knowledge generation and how globalization has enabled that, and how presses for university financial well-being and the pursuit of resources external to state legislatures and to private giving have encouraged universities to think very differently about their role in the commodification of knowledge. The second book with Gary Rose followed up on that, and it is Academic Capitalism in the New Economy. And this speaks to the new faculty members in some ways, faculty members that have become incredibly entrepreneurial, that are answering as much to the private market as they are their universities, and the arrangement that universities, departments, and faculty members make that enable faculty to engage in this entrepreneurial behavior, presumably for the benefit of everyone. Sheila does not argue that this is for the benefit of everyone, but she lays out the arrangements that lead to academic capitalism generally and specifically as it deals to faculty knowledge, to the privatization of the knowledge that faculty are generating. Sheila has been recognized widely for her work. She is an American Educational Research Association Fellow. This is the highest privilege bestowed upon members of the American Educational Research Association, the leading association in education. She is the Association for the Study of Higher Education Research Achievement Award recipient. She has received the American Educational Research Association Lifetime Achievement Award. She's been the president of the American Association of the Study of Higher Education. And she's played a longstanding role with AAUP and served on the AAUP Committee T for some period of time. She has traveled in the last 5 years to countries that I cannot begin to count to talk about many of the ideas that are put forward in the books and many of the ideas that are being put forward in her current line of research. These countries include Finland, Norway, Austria, Argentina. I'll stop. There's a long list. Where's that? Bolivia, okay. So let me just use that as evidence to say that Sheila is as accomplished of a scholar as they come in education in the social sciences. It is our distinct honor to have you visit with us tonight, Sheila, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. It is an honor to give the Howard Bowen Lecture. He is a man whose work I have always admired. So I'm gratified to be here and to speak with you tonight. So what I thought I would do tonight, I'm going to speak to you about STEM and the liberal arts, but I'm probably going to speak to you more about stratification and private advantage, although we'll touch all these topics. And can y'all hear me okay? Is it clear enough? And what I'm going to do is, first of all, as I said, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. And largely what I'm going to talk about is the highlights of this book. I'm doing an edited book I'm doing with my co-author, Barrett Taylor, for Peter Masson's series with Springer. And I'm doing this because I think some of the work is so very interesting, and I hope you do too. So the title, as you can see, is Stratification, Privatization, and Vocationalization of Higher Education. And I'm not going to talk about the EU, only the US, although I'm going to lead off with Simon Marginson, who talks about global higher education. And Simon makes the rather sweeping claim in his first chapter that at the national level, there's a different way that stratification plays out than at the global level. The national level, he says, stratification is binary, and there's the elite system and all the rest. So you get great value if you go to elite universities, and from the non-elite universities, you get little or no value. And the sort of underlying argument for that is the greater the massification of higher education, which now in Martin Tro's terms is probably universal higher education, the greater the massification, the greater the stratification. And of course, that's because the more people who have higher education, the more those who always had it seek to differentiate themselves, either by seeking to go to particular schools or doing higher degrees, like masters and PhDs and executive leaderships and the like. So Simon makes that argument, which I think I wouldn't say it was binary. I think it's more graduated than that. But nonetheless, I do think that the more massification, the more stratification. He makes a different case at the global level. He says at the global level, we have world-class universities. That's what everyone wants to have. Every country wants to have a world-class university. And while every country can have an elite national university, not everybody has world-class universities the way we measure them. They may indeed be world-class. But what we tend to do with our rankings and other normative social technologies is to privilege research. So research is basically key to getting high rankings on any global rankings, like the Shanghai rankings. And that tends to be grants and contracts, publications, patents, startups, things like that. And whether you're looking at the Times Higher Education Supplement or the Shanghai rankings, the US is up there. The global level, these are the Shanghai rankings for, I think, 2014, maybe 2013. The US holds 20 of the top 25 spots. And it's not quite that much in the top 50, but a lot. And when we say world class and we look at this, it looks like 25, that's a lot. 50, that's like 60 of them, or, well, not 60, 37 or something like that. But the argument we make in this group is it's really different in the United States. I mean, this is for the world as a whole. But when you look at universities, research universities within the United States, of research-intensive universities, we see over the period from 1990 to the present increasing stratification among the research-intensive universities with growing inequality on all fronts. Okay? So I guess you can read that. I can't read it. So Barrett Taylor did a latent class analysis, multi-level latent class analysis, using the variables presented up there. And the question that he was looking at was, what are the stratification patterns among US research universities, and the question of why some universities produce more research than others. He looked at 119 public universities and 48 private, and these are the research-intensive universities. I think it's the Carnegie classification. And those are the variables that he looked at. I'm not going to run through them all. but they're the obvious candidates. So he looked at the public universities and the private universities separate over the period 2000 and 2008. That was a period when there was really a lot of competition for resources. It's the NIH doubles its money and things like that, and there's just a lot of money out there, a lot of competition. And he ended up with 4 classes, and the reasons the numbers change over time is because the members of the class change over time, right? Because you've got different times. So the 4 classes were the elite universities, and they were places like UC Berkeley, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I mean, there were numbers to choose from, but I said, you've got to put that in because that's my alma mater. And Georgia Tech. And they're mainly flagships, but throughout the period, in the elite class, there were only 10 to 12 universities. It wasn't, you know, the 118 that were in his sample. The next group was the strivers, and those who sought to be elites, and there were 7 to 17 of those. Penn State was one, and the University of Pittsburgh was another. And then there were middle-class universities. They do some research, and you know, they're like Kansas State, University of Tennessee, Oregon State. And then the last group is the poor relations, and that was all the rest. They didn't do much research at all. So, what differentiates? And for the public universities, the big differentiators were selective admissions. The more selective you were, the more likely you were to be in the elite class, and that means produce the most research. More faculty members per 100 FTE, greater state subsidy for your university, which in California, because probably going back to the California master plan, the university systems gets more, and probably Berkeley and UCLA and Santa Barbara still get more than anybody else. And also abundant federal research resources. So that's what differentiated the group. And then the question is, did this change over time? And the answer is yes. And here we see, if you can see the lines, the top line, the solid line is the middle-class universities, and they lose people. People move down, and then the elite university is I think it's the bottom, the second one from the bottom, and they stay the same. They basically don't change very much. And the strivers don't change very much, and the poor relations go down and then up some, but mainly down. So what you have is the strivers go from 6 to 14% of the sample, and examples of people who move up are Michigan State and the University of Colorado. But most move down, and examples of those who move down are SUNY Stony Brook, SUNY Buffalo, and SUNY Stony Brook, and UC Riverside. The elite basically stayed the same. So you get more people going down, the elites staying the same, and fewer going up. In other words, increased stratification among public research universities. For private universities, there was a new variable added. It was endowments. And there were reasons why we chose not to do the public endowments, but generally, as we'll see as we go on, they're not as great. So again, there are 4 classes that emerged. An R&D super elite, Johns Hopkins and Caltech were that, and they have more money than anybody else and are most successful at getting money from the federal government and producing research and other research products. And next was a private money plus industry super elite, and that was Duke and MIT, where you're doing really a lot of industrial related research along with federal research. And then there's the elite with the old endowment money, Harvard and Yale, and Stanford and the usual culprits. suspects, culprits. Then there's the tuition-focused private research universities, which were Boston University, Vanderbilt, NYU, and many others that you like. And you can see they are the majority of these places. And they are dependent primarily on tuition dollars. They do substantial research, but nothing compared to the other ones. And the elite private universities have robust capacity for both instruction and research. They employ more faculty members than do the others. They admit fewer applicants. Over time, they've restricted rather than expanded seats. They spend more of their own funds, of which they have abundant, on education, more research support from the federal government and the state governments. And they expended more of their own funds on R&D. More doctorates than anybody else per 100 FTE. And I think this is probably, in the end, the most important thing, the largest per student endowment of any group. And examples of these are Cornell, Princeton, and Stanford. The capacities of private universities extended on a scale that dwarfed that found among public elite universities. The gap was evident on all variables. Nowhere was this more private advantage more pronounced than in federal R&D support. On average, elite privates, not all privates, but elite privates, collected about 180% of the per student federal R&D expenditures of elite publics. In terms of change over time, there was almost none. Only one university moved into the elite class, and that was Carnegie Mellon. And what's interesting there is that so many universities put so much effort into trying to move up. And when you look at whether they did or not in the 2000 to 2008 period, the answer is no, that stratification became even more extreme among the groups, as we'll get to later. So why? The sort of often given explanation is that private, meaning nonprofit universities, charitable universities, because that's what they are under the law, are more autonomous, nimble, flexible, focused, et cetera. But I'm going to make the case that, and so that they're more like corporations, but I'm going to make the case that they in fact have large amounts of sort of not too obvious state subsidies, and that they have been in many ways able to take advantage of the neoliberal state, which is characterized by active deregulation and state support for liberalized financial markets and massive expansion in global financial exchanges. And the state is disfavored in the neoliberal philosophy because it is seen as encumbering the free and efficient operation of markets. But neoliberalism is, at least in part, a state-led project in that the state dismantled its regulatory capacity while providing, to some degree, protection for financial risk-taking. Think of 2008 and the aftermath. The preference for markets sort of means the state relevels anything that looks like a market. Susan Mettler calls it the submerged state. And that's a web of policies that use market-like mechanisms. But they're not really markets. They're quasi-markets, at least as far as the universities are concerned, that the state uses to achieve goals by setting up market-like competitions, okay? So the two obvious ones, which account for a considerable chunk of change in all our lives, are student aid and research and development. They promise increases in efficiency because they sort of have market logics. But generally, and this is Mettler's major point, is these policies redistribute money upward. So they don't do the public welfare state that sort of helped all and the most needy, but instead the beneficiaries of these programs are largely those that already have a lot, whether it's individuals, organizations, or households. So when we think of student aid, and that's what her book is about, I highly recommend it to you. It's a really interesting book. The government wants to increase access, so it develops programs that put dollars in the hands of students. And then they support it through various forms of federal grants and financial aid, and also at the state level, for which universities compete. And R&D, leave us not forget, they're mission agencies. They're not markets. They're trying to accomplish things. Even at the NSF, which has always been the smallest amount of them, is now really committed to innovation as a policy. And so what happens is we look at the competition, right? You compete for the students, you compete for the R&D, and we don't look at the submerged state and the fact that this isn't a market, but it is a way, in some ways, of channeling money to institutions that are already the most successful. And it helps them be successful because they have more money. We argue that endowments are key, and that competition for donor dollars may be the biggest of all the competitions in the submerged state. So what you see in donor dollars is that there's no taxes on endowment profits. You have great growth of the rich, right, the 1%, and great inequality who have more money to donate than. There are changes in rules and administrative practice in the 90s that encourage donation. The bracket that the subsidies covers go up. And their biggest thing is probably changes in investing practices. So basically, we make the argument that the reason the private research universities do so well is that resources are necessary for research. Over time, with big science, resources and prestige are conflated. They're almost impossible to separate anymore. Although, and this is a really interesting thing, and it's characteristic of the United States, all money, all resources are not fungible. The valued resource, and this is where we get to STEM and the rest of the thing, is research. Most of our federal R&D dollars, 93% of them, are in the STEM fields, okay? What money we had in the arts and sciences has gone down. I think the two largest categories within the little 5% that are left or whatever is economics and cognitive psych. And if you're, and that's all there is. I mean, so we in these other fields, we can't play in the research game. So certainly in the public universities and also in many private universities, what has happened is that tuition dollars, which are not valued as highly as research dollars, because lots of people can get tuition dollars and fewer people can get research dollars, and research dollars are what are the deal in global markets, means that people often, and the tuition dollars are also discretionary dollars, so what happens is that money is often used to support research in STEM fields, and you end up with lots of adjuncts in the liberal arts to teach these courses where you still bring in lots of money, which you want, but you're actually in many ways using it to support STEM fields. And so the liberal arts have not died. They make a lot of money. It's just that people want the money to be in more areas that are valuable to the prestige game, for which you need ever more resources. So that's sort of the argument we're making with regard to STEM and the liberal arts. And you'll have to think about whether it applies here at Claremont or not. The implications of private advantage are that the advantage depends on small numbers of students and large endowments. And it depends on non-transparent government policies that redistribute resources upward. Public universities, which historically educated large numbers of students, including more disadvantaged students than private universities, are themselves now disadvantaged rather than advantaged like the elite privates, not all privates. So, other ways that this happens, private advantage, is through private university boards of trustees. And they play an important part in creating private advantage. I have an NSF grant right now that I've been working on for some time. I had an NIH before that to work on this problem of trustees and what they do and how they act in moving toward the universities toward industry. Private trustees of, this is AAU universities, American Association of American Universities, and there's 60, well, right, but only 60 US, is it not? 2 Canadian, McGill and Toronto, okay. And so the private trustees, when we look at them, connect to more firms, more in the Fortune 500. Half the Fortune 500 firms have CEOs who are trustees of the AAU universities. That's both, but most of them are in the private. And they are channels to industry and innovation, and almost all trustees donate. When we want to see the difference, we're doing a network analysis, which I'm not going to talk a deal about, but this is the public network. And the public network, the red is the universities and the blue are the firms. And you can see how they're clustered and how they're tied to firms. And you can also see those isolates over there in the corner where they're not connected at all to firms and the like. And we have this data from 1975 at, I think it's 10-year intervals to the present. So we got a lot of data points here. But the public, private universities are much denser, okay? And again, we have the red dots are the universities and the blue are the firms. And the highest number of firms are financials. That's true for the whole sample, but particularly for the private universities. That's followed by high-tech manufacturing and then by knowledge-intensive firms. So what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is the exchanges. So then we tried to look at the trustees and what they actually did with the university. How did they interact with these universities? Everybody says they don't govern, right? Or at least they say presidents govern, trustees don't. I beg to differ. At least for private universities. I'm willing to say this may not be the case for public universities. So we're using web research with very stringent protocols. And what we're looking at is at the flow of interaction and people between the specific trustee, the trustee firm, and the universities of which they are stewards. And our initial pass is looking at the public and privates with the most exchanges and the least. The public university that had the most exchanges was Pitt. And the private university was MIT. The ones with the least were Harvard and Nebraska. That's not because Harvard is not connected. Well, it's also in its own standard deviation, so it doesn't need money. I mean, it has more money than many small countries. And when you look at its endowment. And but they are connected to all these policy groups and government things, but we're not there yet. We're doing the firms first. So, and Nebraska is just unconnected. I mean, it's not connected either way. And so in the interests of time, which is moving on, I will concentrate on MIT. So there were 79 trustees tied to 92 for-profit firms and to 5 other AAUs. That means they also sat on the boards of directors of other AAU institutions. And there were between 7 and 47 exchanges for each university trustee pair and 1 to 89 exchanges for each university firm pair. There were alumni hiring networks and startups that were like everywhere. So Flagship Ventures, as an example, And that was interlocked to MIT through one of its partners, who was both a trustee and an alumni of MIT, David Barry, who was the CEO of Flagship Venture Labs, which hired many MIT grads and faculty as partners and employees, and many were also, of course, MIT alumni. Here's David Barry. They're these child geniuses. It's amazing. So he has this little picture there. He's the Flagship Venture Labs, which is the top. And then there's the entrepreneurs and academia and early stage companies and flagship venture capitals. And this is on, the web pages of MIT and of David Barry. And they invest in these areas, which are therapeutics, health technologies, and they invest between $250,000 to $5 million, and as much as 10 to 15 million during the life of the company. And eventually they move them away from being privately held to publicly held. They have like 20 companies that are worth like $15 billion, okay? And this is something one of their venture lab partners, who was an MIT grad, I forget his name, had on his website, and I love it because, he's saying this is what we do. There's academe, which notice is within MIT, the largest part of this thing, and then you move out into flagship ventures and all these corporations and the like. And there is the young man who is in the venture labs and the like. Of the flagship venture lab division, which is the brains of this whole thing, there were 14 partners and associates, 6 or 43% from MIT, including the managing partner and CEO. Their fields were biochem, chem engineering, biomed, med physics, and so on and so forth. Many of these trustees, not the ones I'm just talking about, but others, were on visiting committees and on advisory boards to schools and departments. This also worked in reverse. Many MIT faculty were on corporate advisory boards and committees or on boards of trustees and startups. These changes also involve partnerships, collaborative research, sponsorship of departments, research initiatives, centers, institutes, and the co-sponsorship of startup firms. There was more activity in finance than I would have managed. Some trustees represented financial corporations and acted on the investment committee of the university or as director of the investment corporation. Many were in government. For example, the guy who was head of the U.S. Department of Energy, was also head of the MIT board on its energy initiative. So these trustees were deeply embedded in the university and circulated their knowledge, expertise, resources, and prestige in concrete exchanges with the university, and in many ways with the knowledge of the universities. It wasn't like, they didn't know what they were doing or anything. They actually knew about the university. They often lectured and things like that. The university provided infrastructure and resources of various kinds, including symbolic human capital research, expertise, and prestige for knowledge economy corporations. And the corporations and other entities represented by the trustees did the same for the circle. The community did not see the university as being corporatized as far as we can see. It seemed that they had a shared sense of what the cycle of MIT grads trustees was that involved providing money for startups, for research ventures, donors, and then the cycle went around and again. And it was shared, not like we're doing this because you're the corporations, but it was like a community thing. It surprised me. So more now about endowment management, because remember, most of these corporations are financials that the trustees had. And this is a paper by Brendan Cantwell that is in our book that I really like. And it's called The Death of the Prudent Man. And the prudent man was the standard for endowment for many, many years. And the prudent man was one who invested the capital of charitable ventures such as universities or hospitals or whatever in ways where you preserve the capital at all costs. And what you were looking for was safe, not risky investments. And in 1969, the Ford Foundation funded the Barker Report, where people studied and reviewed all the stuff around the prudent man, and they concluded that the prudent man principle imposed no legal imperative on colleges and universities to follow a conservative strategy for management of endowments. The 1972 Uniform Management of Institutional Funds Act made many of the Barker Report recommendations law and lowered the fiduciary responsibility of trustees and endowment managers that oversaw institutional assets. And you have in the 90s a great growth of nonprofits. I think The Economist said that in the US, the assets of nonprofits are close to the assets of for-profits. So think about that. There's a non-policy of no regulation. The only regulatory body overseeing private endowment management is the IRS. And the IRS has not chosen to look closely at what is a charity, what is not a charity, and how you're spending your money, because every time they do it, they're challenged politically by the right or the left. And then the Common Fund Institute's principle of endowment management says that the Barker Report is really important in setting payout for for higher rates for universities. So what happens is you end up with really permeable boundaries between what's for-profit, non-profit, and all of that. And what we see is, like, for example, close links between the Harvard Corporation, which manages Harvard's massive educational endowment, Wall Street, and also the academic study of finance and economics, which is something people should really look at. We say STEM, 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 but some of the most creative things have been in business and finance in terms of products that change what we do, like credit default swaps, for example. So Harvard, for example, used not-for-profit and tax-exempt endowment money to seed a for-profit hedge fund that attracted additional capital from both not-for-profit and for-profit sources. And when the deal went south, it was the hedge fund, Solid Capital, not Harvard, that took the fall. So nonprofits are able to avoid a lot of the risk that for-profits do. Okay, so this is something that shows you where the rich invest, and the big payout is in the first line. They invest in these really risky, high alternative asset strategies, and they got 60% of their money in them. That's the Yale endowment model, which you may have heard about. And this is the way it looks. The little dotted line is the Ivy League universities, and this is as Brendan calculated them using the Kubo data. And the black line is the Big Ten. And so what happens is, if you have $25 million, you make a lot of money. This is like the black line, and you do really well. But you can never catch up to the other ones because they have so much more money, and they make, on average, 8.3% rather than 6%. And the gap, rather than even staying the same, gets ever larger, okay? So the number of institutions in the top 1% have huge share, and the top 8 endowments reported, like this year, include 7 private universities: Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, MIT, Columbia, and Northwestern, and just 1 public, the University of Michigan, and that was the one at the bottom of the list. Public universities are now trying to do catch-up. They create foundations that are very like in character the boards of trustees of universities, of private universities. So now all AAU publics have these endowment and research foundations, And the members of the board looks like, somewhat like the private boards in occupation and numbers, but we're just starting to deal with this so we don't know too much. And some of the public foundations have made substantial gains. But again, it's very hard to catch up because of the sort of great amount that many of the private ones have. So, generally, we think that segments of nonprofit sector are mechanisms through which the neoliberal state delivers money upward. And I've said most of the rest. I'm going to move forward to what does this do for college student choice. So Lois Weiss, who's at Buffalo, did this recent book, an ethnography of a prep school called Class Struggle. And she makes the argument that the increased inequality, like we've seen, and Thomas Piketty, is that how we say his name? Thomas Piketty talks about all the time. The big, growth in inequality has made parents who are not in the 1% and probably not even in the top 10%, but somewhere in the next 10%, crazed about transmitting status through education by getting their kid to the right college. And so these kids go to prep schools. I have to say, at the prep schools, they often pay more each year than you pay for in-state tuition at the state that they're in. They have AP, they have counseling, they have instruction in creating themselves to be distinctive students who will be ones that elite schools want. And almost all of them apply only to private colleges and universities. Some flagships, but mainly private colleges and universities. So they would be people who all would apply to your private colleges. And the parents and students just spend incredible amounts of money, time, energy, and management in this. So many parents, and we know this from going back to Pat McDonough, hire private counselors. They sometimes pay for their students to have internships. I don't know if you saw the article in The Economist about that, where you can buy your child an internship in high school in Washington for about $10,000. And you can say, gee, he worked for the Senate or something like that. They make multiple applications. They have multiple college visits. They have multiple college revisits and the like. And so that's sort of what this situation of stratification has created, is this intense competition for a relatively limited number of slots. And then, of course, we always have the poor student as consumer. Who is the public? That's always a question. And these are sort of my idea of what we should do. Most people will probably not agree with them, but when I think about it, it's all I can come up with, is that we really should have multiversities for the middle class. We don't want to become a country without a broad and successful and prosperous middle class, which is what we're moving away from now. And I think we need to move away from education and knowledge that redistribute benefits to the few. I would like to see no frills, low tuition, high student-faculty ratios. The probably most democratic phase, and I believe this is backed up by people who do research on this, was the 1950s, when we had low tuition and the GI Bill, and universities had yet to evolve into country clubs. I think we need to repurpose mission agencies to perform research that benefits the citizenry without heavy mediation by corporations, rather than saying, well, we'll make this all for the corporations and then they'll sell it back to you for twice the cost and you already paid for the research. Somehow it has to be broader than that. I mean, more open source, more platforms that many people can be involved in, and more sort of democratization of opportunities to do both science, business, and the arts. And this was a guy who was president of Princeton. I can't remember his name. He was an economist. And he said, we have more social than technical problems, and we should rebuild the social sciences and humanities. So I would be for all of that. And I would also be for separating graduate from undergraduate education, because graduate education is already federalized. And I think by putting so many resources in graduate school, and in many cases redistributing funds from tuition, which I am not, far from being the only person who says happens, like Ron Ehrenberg does, Chris Newfield does, many, many people, that we need to do something about that. So we need to maybe separate graduate education and do it separately. And as Brendan Cantwell argues in his piece, I really think we should consider tax on endowments. Because, you know, in many ways it's just, you know, sheltering things for the most privileged schools. So there it is. Thank you very much. I was afraid I wouldn't get through this after eating dinner, but I got psyched as I was doing it. Questions, please? Yes?
My name is Javier Ramirez. I'm a second-year PhD in education policy, evaluation, and reform. So I was talking with some of my colleagues about this earlier, about CSU system in particular, in regards to this increasing trend that's occurring nationally when it comes to the idea of funding based upon outcomes. So contingency funding, how does that play out in terms of public institutes being, their funding is contingent based upon the outcomes of grad rates, improved grad rates, improved persistence rates? How do you think that plays out into the scheme here that you've outlined tonight?
You know, this is going to sound bad, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that you'll get what you want, okay? If you want people to graduate, faculty will graduate them ultimately, and you'll have high grad rates. If that's what the incentive is, and that's how the rewards are structured. But I think that would make it more like what Simon Marginson says, where you have the binary divide, you have the elite and all the rest. And CSU would be in all the rest. I know that's not a pretty thing to say, but I see it happening already, and not in California and other places I've worked, where if that's the reward, we'll incent until people do it.
So besides opposition from people who benefit from the current system, what do you believe would be your biggest challenges to implementing what you believe on the last few slides?
Parents who want their children to have more than other people's children. I mean, I'm really serious about this. I mean, I have so many friends, people I love, and they say, well, you know, we're not doing X this year because we have to pay for Sally's internship. And I sort of look at them, and they say, well, it isn't that we don't want, everybody should have a chance, and we don't want anything bad to happen to these kids in other schools, but Sally's going to Yale or whatever, and it's part of a class thing that we don't talk about in the United States, and I don't mean class like in any rigid way, but because we're all middle class, right? Even the 1% say they're middle class. So, but there are these underlying structures that we don't deal with, and you know, I don't know if you remember, but there was a time in probably it was the early 70s when people were going on about what you could do to change things. And there was actually a senator in Illinois who said, well, once we know their scores, right, on the GRE or not the GRE, the SATs or whatever the thing was, we should do it by lottery. People went ballistic. They said, no way, never. There's no chance that could ever happen, because it meant they couldn't, you know, move to do the best they could for their kid. And, you know, I'm not above all of this, so I'm not pretending like I had a kid and I was faced with these dilemmas, and yeah, so it's hard. Steve, and then, yeah.
Well, thanks, first of all, for a characteristically data-rich and beautifully conceptualized talk.
Oh, Steve, that's so
Yeah.
sweet.
I've got a small correction
Oh, okay.
and a,
I should have known.
and a question, which is,
Okay.
so the small correction is, I have to say this because I'm from UC Riverside.
Oh, okay.
But our research revenues have gone up dramatically since your data, and they're
Okay, since
determined-
2008?
And they're, and
Yeah,
they're
okay. But
bound to go up
it's
even
I
more.
was right for 2008.
Yeah, for
but, okay.
2008, it's correct, but since
yeah.
that time, they've gone up dramatically, and there's a
Okay.
new medical school.
You get to say that because I got to say my alma
Yeah.
mater was a.
Yeah,
an
so
elite.
that's the small
Okay.
correction.
Okay.
The question is kind of a paradox, and it has to do with college choice. We know that selectivity is getting greater, and the cost of going to these schools is getting greater. But, you know, we've been looking at this data, and I talked to you a little bit about it earlier. If you look at senior executives in American firms, it's not highly concentrated. And I'm talking down to the senior vice president level. It's not highly concentrated in the top 25. In fact, the most concentrated sector is government,
Right.
we're finding. And
That's,
when you get
that's
to-
certainly true
when you
according to
get
Diane Domhoff.
When you get to energy and defense, you know, the concentration is very low. And in fact, the biggest feeders are University of Texas, Texas A&M, Colorado School of the Mines.
Did you look at financials?
And the financial industry, entertainment, internet, our concentration is a little higher, but a lot of sectors it's low, and then where the concentration is in the business schools and the law schools, the elite business schools and law schools. So there's been a kind of upward, educational upgrading maybe. And there's a lot of non-U.S. educated execs too, more in some industries than from the top 25. So is this a paradox, or is the data wrong, or why are people, breaking their backs to send their kids to these schools when they'd have, if they're aiming for the top, it's not necessarily a great
I
investment.
agree with you on this. I mean, our data show concentration, but not like complete, right, or anything like that. And I think our private trustees at the really elite places are different. But, as you move down, it's not that way. I think it's insane. I mean, when you look at the tuition-driven private universities where you're going to shell out $50,000 a year to send your kid to Boston University when the student to faculty ratio is like terrible and there's no research and stuff like that. I mean, it's a bad bargain, right? But they do. And I think it's because of this class thing and the fear of not having your kid be able to. Because I think ultimately, we were talking about this with the students today. I think the big thing we lack are jobs. Okay, that it's not that we don't. I mean, you can put all these people in STEM, but they're actually not that many STEM jobs, especially for a first degree, right? It's in some level crazy. And we have lost. Well, I mean, we have export jobs, right? But most of it has been, the biggest numbers are automation. And there just aren't a lot of jobs anymore, and we've massified higher education. And I think at some level people understand stuff like that, and they're just trying to do stuff that'll maybe help their kids or stuff, even though it's not particularly fresh.
Is there any role for thinking about need blind admissions and in terms of these top universities, elite universities, for diversifying their students and trying to, does that play any, is there any trends there, anything that would change what you're talking about?
Steve would probably know more about that, but at a lot of these places, and this is, undergraduate school is a lost leader. And people are not focused on undergraduate education and needs blinds education and the like. I think isn't Yale the one that does the most needs blinds? Yeah, what? Who Pomona does? Yeah. Yeah, but it's not a widespread trend. And that would be great, but they also are still trying to bring in high tuition. Although the most elite could pay for these people for the, next 400 years or something like that. So that's a really interesting and good question, because I mean,
Harvard and Pomona are not, they're not trying to bring in high tuition.
well then, I don't know about Pomona, but Harvard charges a high tuition.
Well, Pomona does, I mean, Harvard does and Pomona does to people who can pay it, but they also, actually try pretty hard to bring in students that they fully pay for their financial.
Overall, when you look at the data, and this is Lionel Lewis's and what's his name, Kingston stuff, the elite privates do not educate lots of people who are poor. It's like about 4%. So they might be doing needs blinds admission, but they aren't like helping the poor people.
I was just wondering if there's any trends there.
I haven't seen any. I would love it if we did. I mean, if I were really wealthy, I mean, what would be better sort of like publicity, advertisement, whatever, than saying, we will just fund all these people and the like. So, but I don't know about it.
What I think is infecting academia, this inequality, is really a huge societal problem.
I agree with that.
Where when you have 0.1% of Americans who control 22% of the wealth of this country, and this is the worst it's been since 1920. And so it's somewhere or another there needs to be a democratization movement. Somebody needs to rise up. We all need to rise up and say enough is enough. The politics is now being controlled by the rich. The amount of money that was spent in this recent elections is utterly obscene, and so we got a huge problem. We got a problem in academia. I agree with you
But the
on
bigger
that.
one, no, and I completely agree with you, because I think academia isn't separate, right? I mean, it abuts these other fields where, you change tax policy and that creates other opportunity for academia, and we can't just look at academia by itself. I completely agree.
And so much, the rich get richer, and so that's what's happening in academia. I mean, the endowments are growing at astronomical levels at a place like Harvard, and and now the government, as you pointed out, the research dollars aren't going toward the solving of social problems.
No.
They're going toward making the corporations a little more efficient and more productive and richer.
I want to go, and this is actually goes to sort of back around the corner to Jack Scott's comment. We created a system of higher education that was intended to do what you want done. I went to a school that has the motto learning and labor, and it's got a railway wheel and a plow on the seal, and it didn't give degrees for the first 40 or 50 years. How do we get this, I mean, we have to talk, we had an election yesterday, and it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to turn out, so I had a little bird under the saddle here. When you get away from all the academizing and you get down to politics and policy, what's your notion about a way forward?
That's the hard part.
Yeah.
But the one. Okay. Here's the maybe this could happen. I really think that a lot of people are not going to get the sort of jobs that they thought they would, because we have to feed the beast, right? And we produce more and more graduates. Maybe not the super elite, the creme de la creme, these like 8 or 9 schools, but the flags and the tuition-driven private universities and all of that, we churn them out. And public universities particularly do more because that's what they do when they don't have any other money, is they have a lot of out-of-state people, they raise more money and all that, and they produce more. So then you're gonna, we're gonna sort of have these people who aren't, I mean, the story, right? Human capital and, so much more than other people, and it's not gonna work. And one of the things that could happen is all these very well-trained symbolic analysts, of which we now have way too many, could start their own universities that were no-frill universities and say, here we are, we're gonna have another model and you should try it. And we can have, like, I mean, I bet I could recruit 8 of you here tonight to join in and be faculty persons. And there would be no frills, there would be no dorms, there would be, I mean, you would just come and learn and get your degree and maybe try to do more of this sort of open source, smaller platforms, local stuff, and all of that. So that's the most optimistic I can be, and that's not unoptimistic.
That's interesting. There seems to be a good bit of that.
It's sort of happening, right? I mean, it's like not like this is Alice in Wonderland or something. Yeah.
But it's interesting that the threat is to the lower tier. That is, the threat is to these tuition-driven
Privates and the flagships.
tuition-driven privates, that are at the bottom of your pyramid. The threat is not to the disequal colleges that are at the top.
But there are not very many of those. That might give us our chance.
Yeah.
Where? Oh, I'm sorry. I keep turning the wrong way at the wrong moment. Sorry.
I had a brief response to his comment and another question. I think people overemphasize these prep schools and et cetera because people are just unwilling to admit how much chance there is in life. So they overemphasize and overinvest in the handful of things that are within their control. So there's no guarantee your daughter gets to go to Harvard and have a successful career afterwards.
Right, many do not.
Certainly put her in prep school.
Yeah.
And therefore, if that increases the chances, even minuscule, that's all you can do. The second bit was, you mentioned in your proposals, these multiversities. How would they differ from and improve upon the already existing community college system we have? And how irredeemable is the community college system if you want to propose a whole new tier of schools?
Oh dear, I don't know. I'm mixed on the community colleges, okay? I actually think they do some things very well, and that when they're doing, remember they were transfer places to start with, and there still are a lot of students who transfer and do well. As we have a colleague, Manuel Gonzalez-Conche, whose work shows that, if you're motivated and have decent grades and you're in science, and you're a poor kid, you can actually start at the community college and do quite well and transfer and do as and do as well as the others. So you don't. I'm not against community colleges at all. What I worry about is the 60 or 70% of people in remedial education when they come in, and I don't have a good idea about what to do about that. I know when I was talking to some of the students today, they said there really are better models of remediation. So, I could actually see, and I think this is another one of these things that's like already happening, where people are now going to community colleges rather than, say, like starting at the flagship, because it's much cheaper, and you actually can get a fair amount of attention at a community college if you're a good student and you're motivated and all of that. And then you save your bucks and you go on to the next. And I do hear, I think there are some empirical data about that. But, so that would be one way to change it. But I don't know what you do with kids who get to college and university and really have real problems being literate and numerate. I think that's hard. And those, because of the open door policy, we do get them. And I don't know, does anybody have a plan for this?
I was hoping you did.
What?
I was hoping you did.
No, I have no plan. Yes, hi.
Hi. I was really interested in your presentation and how you discussed the advantage that many of the elite institutions have with federal funding. It reminded me of a piece that I just read from Robert Reich, who talked about how the elite private institutions also have an enormous advantage over public institutions through their donors. That, that there's a lot of public funding that goes into these institutions because people donate and aren't taxed, right?
Yes,
For
yes,
donations.
yes.
So it's interesting that these advantages are accruing and accruing across the federal government, individuals, and all that.
Yeah. Scott. And then I saw someone back here with a hand up.
I want to bring you back to this wide-ranging stratification scenario is intriguing, but I'm still, I lose my attention span slightly tonight.
So do I.
To begin with, but I'm still stuck on what cost of liberal arts. I don't think you.
Well, you know, okay. I think that liberal arts are not dying because students in the liberal arts pay tuition, and so no one wants to lose the liberal arts because they're a way of getting resources for other things that you want to do. But what people are not doing is putting money back into the liberal arts at many places. In other words, they have very high number of adjuncts, and generally they have no sort of external places from which they can get the money that lets them play the prestige game and all of that. So nobody wants to do away with them, but neither do they want to fund them.
Is that an empirical argument?
That's an empirical.
Staff on a heavier adjunct?
They are. Yes, 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 yes. No, it's not, it is true.
And they are the cash cows or the fat cats. I read
They-
a paper in 2001.
Right, right. Weren't you a co-author of that paper? But yeah. So that it does. The more I have another paper on that. There are more adjuncts, and also, you know, like the paper we just had accepted at your journal, where we argue that there's huge segmentation in universities where the sciences are like, and some like business and law often too, even more than the sciences, I think. They're just, I mean, when you just walk into the building, it's like totally different than like the School of Ed at a public university, right? I mean, you would say, that looks like high school. Oh, that looks like a corporate office. And so I think that there's segmentation, and that we interviewed a bunch of faculty after, and this was where we were doing that prestige economy thing where the money isn't the same, even all money is not equal. We want money for research and to do that. And the people in the English department, I mean, there were some people who wouldn't talk to us. The historians said, I don't want to pick over the corpse again. I mean, that's an actual quote from one of them. And the people they had to like beg from the administration for any little thing in the arts. And this was at like 2 public universities. Whereas, and they taught larger loads, and you know, nobody wanted to go away, and they had more adjuncts and things like that. And then the people in the sciences, like they negotiated with the administration, and they cut deals with the administration, and they would say, well, if you don't do that, I'm not going to apply for this, and here's how we're going to split that, and all of that. So that's how I see it, Scott. I mean, I see real segmentation occurring in the face of this prestige economy game that striving and elite universities are playing. Okay, is that helpful?
On the record.
Okay.
One more question.
Yeah?
One more. No, not for me. One more.
Oh, one more question. Yes?
In your presentation, you said that elite private universities collected 180% of the per student federal research of elite public university. Then federal government changed this policy. This is not this is not from the companies, but this is just federal government.
Well, they could, but the way it's set up now is you compete for it, okay? And those people, all the and you know, actually public universities used to fare better, and Steve tells us some of them are again now, than as well as many privates back when we were younger, and that has changed to a degree, but you would have to, they would have to change the rules of the game to do that, which they might. I mean, they changed them to sort of disfavor public universities, so you could do it again, or just make it more equal for other people. They do it periodically. I mean, remember the EPSCoR program and stuff like that, where you try to make more universities be able to do research and things, but then it swings the other way.
Alonzo's been being very patient, so we're going to give him one
Okay.
short question.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you to my colleague here who actually sparked it. So you briefly talked about how, you know, starting some kind of college and there's no jobs for folks out of STEM and everything. And I'm wondering if you can comment, or what are your thoughts on for-profit colleges? Because it seems like what's happening is some students, and I've witnessed some of this, where it's like, what do I do? Do I go to college? Do I wait for 4 years to get a degree to get a job, or do I go to a 18-month program where I'm promised a job at the end? So I'm wondering, just given the discussion of tonight, if you can comment on for-profits.
I can. For-profits, if they didn't have the ability to get federal student financial aid, would close tomorrow. And they're the least successful of any of the sectors in higher education and actually graduating students. So unless you could, I mean, there are exceptions, like DeVere, and there's like 3 of them that really do get people jobs, and they finish and they graduate. But most do not. They're just there to capture the federal financial student aid, and you would have to change that model if it were going to happen. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with, you know, like really good vocational programs like Germany and stuff like that, where you have these people who are insanely productive because they can do these high-tech things and they get paid real wages. The problem is there are not so many of those jobs, but I would be delighted to have some people do that as an alternative to college if they didn't want to go all the years. I know people say, oh, it's not the same and all of that, but I don't feel that way. I'm fine with that. But it would have to be not in the format we have for-profit colleges now. I think you could do it. You know, a lot of it is internships supported by, not internships, relationships with corporations, where you do this in Germany between the university and the corporation, and, you know, you're preparing people for work in these really knowledge-intensive technical industries. And I wouldn't be against that. I know it's not college like we think about it, but it would be good.
Come stand with me.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheila.
Scott and I have known each other for a long time.
Okay. So you leave me with questions that are unanswered that my colleagues are surely going to interrogate me on.
Okay.
And so we'll have to have you back, but your development of the web of influence through educational institutions and corporations leaves out important sectors like the rarefied sector that we live in here of the elite liberal arts college.
It does. You're
So
right.
the question I want to hear on your next visit, over lunch with the colleagues that I'm going to have to explain this to, I'm looking at some of them right now, will be what role the elite liberal arts college, or the liberal arts college generally, in this scheme that you're trying to specify.
All right.
Okay, and then secondly, more to our immediate interest, my immediate self-interest, President Freund's immediate self-interest, Provost Adams' self-interest, and many of you in the room, what role the private graduate-only institution without hard sciences?
That's
That's right. That's right.
I
Yeah.
don't have an answer. You know, Claremont couldn't be in any of our samples because it doesn't, the way we did it, it doesn't fit, okay? Because you don't have, so you're not in our data. I called Barrett because I'm going to
It's a good thing we're not in her data because we. Yeah, that's right. At least we weren't the poor relative, right?
No, of the poor relation. relation, yeah.
The poor relation.
But,
Okay,
boy, Scott, that's a-
so
that's a
we'll pull you
tough
back to
question.
answer that. Before I thank you finally here, let me just note that we have a panel on December, Jack Scott, I'm looking at you, Chuck Kirshner, I'm looking at you, December 3rd, we decided, something like that. We'll give you the Vergara versus California panel with Jack Scott, Carl Cohn, Chuck Kirshner, and moderated by David Benefi-Leiby. You'll be hearing more about this. We're developing the publicity around that. It's about teacher tenure in California, the current course case that's before the court, and its implications for labor and education in California and across the country. In late January, we will have the second annual Darrell Smith Diversity Lecture, a new lecturer in our lineup, and we will have Laura Perna joining us from the University of Pennsylvania to deliver that address. There's more. I won't overload you with any more. There are several more beyond that, but you'll be hearing about this in the coming month, about the lineup for the remainder of the year and into spring and early summer. So now I would like to, Sheila, like the National Press Club, you get a mug, okay? It's all we give you, but thank you.
I'm a dedicated coffee drinker, and thank you for being a wonderful audience. You asked such great questions. I really appreciated it.
And yes, thank you for being a wonderful audience and for being wonderful colleagues and community members, and we look forward to seeing you at our next talk. Thanks so much. Have a great night.